listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, bringing you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Witte, here with Bob Schlehuber, kicking off our second hour here. And we're going to take a look at stimulus packages, past and present. And that's going to go really quick, people, because there's only been one, right? There is also a lot of other economic news to get into, though, as well as some predictions for our quote-unquote recovery. So if you want to get into any of that with us, you know where we are. We're at 202-521-1320. We're at Sputnik Misfits on Twitter. You can message us at Instagram. We are all over the place. And here with Bob and I now are Dr. Linwood Tauheed, president of the National Economic Association, and also Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. So Dr. Tauheed and Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So as I said, we've had a bunch of economic news this week. We've had reports on private payrolls. We've had the monthly labor report. We've got jobless reports. We've got Biden's nominees for different aspects of budget and treasury. So let's start with payrolls. We have this ADP monthly payrolls report that dropped on Wednesday that found that private payrolls grew at their slowest pace since July amid a deceleration in large business hiring for November. Companies hired 307,000 workers last month, well below the 475,000 estimate from a Dow Jones survey of economists. That's from CNBC, I believe. And I just wanted to say, I feel like a lot of these stories over the last couple of months contain lines like this, well below Wall Street estimates, et cetera. I've also seen sometimes these indicators exceeding expectations, but I wanted to start with you, Steve, and ask you whether you see a trend in these Wall Street predictions and whether they are overly optimistic or pessimistic, or should we just read anything at all into them?
So, I take the Wall Street rather, it doesn't drive what the government can do. So I don't really look at Wall Street as a real indicator. I look at what I think of in this particular case is the fact that we haven't been spending. The spending that occurred went into charitable deductions. It went into all these other things that had nothing to do with spending on the people. And so if you look at the way the government spending is going right now, these companies are watching the regular people not have enough money to spend on their day-to-day lives. People are in serious financial jeopardy, and that impacts the bottom line of businesses. And when they, aren't receiving the kind of income, they're not able to sell the product. They're not able to you're going to see hiring slow. You're going to see prediction. I mean, this is the season where everybody's supposed to be buying and buying and buying. And we haven't seen any kind of pay to the people. Millions and millions of people are in dire shape and haven't received any kind of help during this pandemic in many, many months. Going back to the summer when the CARES Act ended. So I think that, I don't know where they would get a positive projection of job growth at this time other than expecting the seasonal employment. But to be fair, I really think that rather than worrying so much about what Wall Street is saying, I think it's really an indicator of the fact that we haven't spent, the government hasn't taken care of the people. The government hasn't spent on people, and without that money circulating in the economy, the real economy where real people live, where they pay electric, where they pay, for all their other bills, buy loaves of bread and gallons of milk, they're not going to be able to do that. So I think that's where these numbers go.
Since you mentioned spending, Steve, let me follow up with you, because I wanted to take a little look back at the CARES Act, do sort of an autopsy on it. And I want to ask you, so where did most of our spending go, especially looking at that stimulus bill? What industries did it really try to save, and who did it leave to sink?
Well, if you look, ProPublica has a great breakdown of this stuff, and really, I'll just plagiarize and read right off of it. They had charitable donations of $4.83 billion, where they basically took away the 60% threshold and said, "Hey, you can donate up to 100%." So these are like gifts to people that have money. Passed through entities, it was like 140 billion. And then you look at banks and other groups, corporate deductions, 12.9 billion. Corporate losses that they write off 88.7 billion. So this was all government handouts. I mean, we got one payment for $1,200 to the people, and have received really no other help other than that $600 unemployment benefit that was out there that has long since ceased. So, I mean, it's helped industry. It has helped really the Wall Street has been able to financialize its losses. It's been able to prop up the investor class at the expense of the working class and regular people. So that's what you've seen with this CARES Act.
And Linwood, let me bring you in here. I want to talk about this November jobs report. The headline is, this is in the Washington Post, is the economy added 245,000 jobs in November, the slowest month of growth since recovery began. And I reference the headline because I feel like we are being told constantly that we are in an economic recovery, but it doesn't feel like one. And obviously, you know, the economists, the people who put together this report are looking at indicators like job growth and maybe the stock market. But I would like to ask you if you think this really feels like a recovery yet, and if you are going to create a set of indicators for a real recovery, what would they be?
Well, no, we were almost into a recovery. In April of this year, we lost 20 million jobs. Now that is unprecedented. In May, we added about 3 million. In June, we added almost 5 million. And so we were increasing our recovery. We were adding jobs to recover from that over 20 million decrease. And then since June, all of the numbers have been lower than the numbers before. And so there was a great drop to about 2 million added from July. And every month since July, August, September, October, and November, the recoveries, the jobs created has been going down. And so if we were in a recovery, that recovery ended in June. We are now going back into we are going back into a hole here in terms of the number of jobs created. And so, no, this doesn't look like a recovery. On paper, it's not a recovery. There was a potential for a recovery when the CARES Act was passed, and money, even though it wasn't sufficient, for example, the $1,200 to each to persons that went out, and the $600 a week unemployment benefits and PPP and so forth. That was what needed to be done. It wasn't enough to sustain that recovery, and so we've collapsed. And of course, there's nothing out there now. The Republicans and Democrats are looking at perhaps second quarter of next year for any kind of second recovery act. By that time, we will be completely underwater again. We'll start losing jobs. We're going back into recession. And so, no, this is not a recovery. Now, in terms of measures of the economy, you know, what's normally reported is what's called the U3 unemployment rate, and that unemployment rate is 6.7%. That's down from 6.9% in October, but that number is very deceptive because the unemployment rate can decline if people stop looking for work. So you have a smaller pool of persons who are actually looking. Those are called discouraged workers. And the discouraged worker number is included in what is called the U6 unemployment rate. So while the U3 is at 6.7%, the U6 is at 12%, usually about twice as high as the U3 number. That's a better number to look at in terms of what's actually going on, because that number includes those who are underemployed. That is, those who have jobs that are below their qualifications. They were laid off and they took whatever came along. It also includes discouraged workers, those who have been looking for work for quite a while and have decided that they're not going to find work. and therefore they stopped looking, at least for a while. And so a better number is the U6 rate.
Is there anything else? I mean, we talk on the show a lot about the enormous dichotomy between what Wall Street does and what real people feel on the ground. So we have this U6 unemployment gauge as a better indicator of what's going on. But is there anything else that, you feel like would be a good indicator of when the real recovery starts? I'm thinking, I don't know, home buying or income. I have no idea. That's why I'm asking you.
Those indices are, home starts, new homes, persons who are planning to build new homes, so forth, is a good indicator of what people who are going to buy homes or spend money think about what the economy is going to be in the future. That, of course, affects what they do in the current time. There's a measure that's called the Consumer Confidence Index, which is an indication of what ordinary people, ordinary consumers think about the future of the economy, and that's going to affect whether they're going to spend money now. Now, the current Consumer Confidence Index is 96.1, and that might sound good, but 100 means kind of a neutral in terms of confidence. Anything over 100 means that the population says, I think the economy is going to be good, so I'll spend money. Anything below 100 says, I don't think it's going to be very good, so I'm going to save, or I don't think I'll have the money to spend. And so what that indicates, what that does is, last year around the holiday season, there was a survey that came back that people were expecting to spend about $1,000 during the Christmas holiday. That report for this year is about $500. So people are expecting to spend about half of what they spent last Christmas, last holiday season, because the consumer confidence is below 100. People don't believe the economy is going to be very good. And, of course, that leads to a fulfillment of that expectation, because when you spend less money, then that creates less income and the economy starts to shrink. And so the Consumer Confidence Index is I think, a much better indication of the future. And if Wall Street were basing their calculations on that number, they probably would not have expected that there would have been 404,000 jobs created. That they wouldn't have overestimated by so much. They've overestimated by about 75%. That's a pretty large overestimation. And so even though the Consumer Confidence Index and the labor force participation rate, which is the percent of the labor force that are actually out there looking for work, are low, Wall Street expectations are high. We should not confuse what goes on in Wall Street with what goes on Main Street. Wall Street has its own Wall Street traders and persons who buy stock have their own reasons for thinking that Wall Street is going to be good. Sometimes that's in conflict with what Main Street is doing.
Right. Let's get into what is actually in our future and talk about this new $900 billion plan that began as a framework for what a bipartisan bill could be and seems to be gaining support, notably among Republicans. Steve, I want to turn back to you. The Post tells us that this bill would give $300 billion in another round of small business aid. It's got $160 billion set aside for state and local governments, and that is something I understand that is, a really crucial need right now. And we have federal unemployment benefits at $300 a week. So that's half of the previous $600 a week that we know lifted a lot of people in this country out of poverty. There's also tens of billions of dollars going to childcare, hunger, vaccine distribution, et cetera. So, Steve, I wonder what you think of this package that's in the works now.
Ro Khanna tweeted out yesterday, I was crucified for telling Pelosi to negotiate at $1.8 trillion when Trump was doing it, but they were so hell-bent on making sure Trump didn't have a win that they put everyone at risk. And now all of a sudden they're coming back with half the size. So half is never as good as whole, right? And half is barely enough. There's a movie, Into the Wild, where a guy slides into a creek and his foot gets stuck under a log. And his eyes are just above the water line, but his nose and mouth can't get over. Now, you could say, hey, his head's coming out of the water. But in reality, he's still going to drown, and he did drown. And that's what this kind of measure does, right? It gives people the idea that we're doing something, but it's not enough. And when you look at the way this goes, the average person, I mean, I don't know where you find housing that'll pay for $300 a month. I don't know where you find enough food to feed even one person for $300 a month. I don't know where, so if you're unemployed, and you're on long-term unemployment, and that money that you've been having is already not enough. A little $300 will give you something, but it's certainly, I think it's almost as bad as not doing anything, simply because it gives the false impression that we've done something for you. Shut up and eat your peas. And so to me, the fear here is the optics are, look, we passed the bill, we did something. And that's not reality. Reality is those people are still into the wild, eyes above the water, nose and mouth under. And I think it's dangerous. I think it's really a sad situation. And Linwood, I really am honored to even be on a show with you. Friends, I love UMKC and friends over there. Pavlina Cherneva put out a nationalizing payroll plan, and it was incredible, and we had helped advance that as well. It went nowhere, of course. Rohan Gray and Rashida Tlaib put out this ABC Act where they were offering up $2,000 payments a month. That didn't go anywhere yet. So there's all these great ideas out there. There's just no political will to do it. Neoliberalism and the right wing have no interest whatsoever in meeting the people's needs, and it's a real tragedy. And this bill is going to go down like, look, we have bipartisanship. Joe Biden saved the day. Look, and it's really a sad piece of legislation, in my opinion.
And speaking of sad pieces of legislation, I want to follow up with you, Steve. Linwood mentioned the unemployment rate in November, 6.7% by one count, more than 12% by a more accurate U6 measure. And we have talked a lot about how misleading all of these figures are really, and how much who they leave out. And so I'm looking into the future of jobs. We have persistent unemployment here. We will probably have an increasingly desperate population over the coming months. We have a permissive regulatory environment for gig companies. I am, of course, thinking of Prop 22 passing in California and on the cusp of being replicated elsewhere. And so to me, this seems like a recipe for disaster and setting the stage for a huge expansion of really exploitative gig work. What are you seeing, Steve?
You just said it. I mean, this is the new norm. And you look at Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has been licking its chops to try and get a UBI out there, because a UBI allows capitalism to thrive while we're spending money, but it's not giving us any security. It's not giving us any meaningful it hasn't changed anything. It's status quo. And so you look, this is kind of a preparatory treatment, in my opinion, for some real negative externalities. I mean, the people themselves are, I think he said in the U3, U6 type arrangement, how people are taking less lucrative jobs just because it's something available. And so in that case, I think it's really a sad situation. I really think that it's going to be indicative, I should say, of much more harsh realities to come.
Bob Schlaber here with Michelle Liddy on Political Misfits. We are joined by Steve Grumbine and Dr. Linwood Tauheed talking about economics. Dr. Tauheed, I wanted to talk a little bit about the incoming economic team for President-elect Joe Biden. We just had a mediation teacher on the show, so hopefully I'm going to stay relaxed again as I go back into some neoliberal conversations. But obviously big waves the last week with Neera Tanden, for example, being tapped to run the OMB, Janet Yellen to head to the Treasury Department, and several folks from the world's largest money manager, BlackRock, will be joining the Treasury and overseeing the National Economic Council. So Dr. Tauheed, it's interesting, or maybe shocking, or maybe disheartening to me that Biden is rebuilding an administration that spurred huge economic populist movements from Occupy Wall Street to the Tea Party uprising. So if liberals' big concern was, watch out in 2024, somebody more dangerous, somebody more articulate, somebody smarter than Donald Trump will come along and lead a populist movement, aren't they almost creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by putting this administration into office?
Well, this is certainly a continuation of recent prior Democratic administrations. It's a continuation of the type of policymakers that Obama put in place and that Clinton put in place. So it is a continuation of that neoliberal policy. So I look at the group, and I'm not surprised, except for one person, which is Neera Tanden. That was a complete surprise.
Yes.
Because to my knowledge, Ms. Tanden has no chops in terms of economics. Now she's being nominated as the head of the Office of Management and Budget, and people should understand that it really doesn't matter whether the rest of the economic team, Janet Yellen at Treasury or others, would propose progressive policy. All of that flows through the Office of Management and Budget, which is going to score it. And the scoring process that's being used now is what we call pay-go. That is, if you spend money one place, you have to decrease spending somewhere else. And Neera Tanden has been on record for wanting decreases in Social Security. She's against Medicare for all. Progressives are outraged about this because even though the mainstream media is proposing putting her up as a progressive, she is not a progressive. She is a neoliberal. And so the OMB director has a tremendous influence on what actually gets out into the budget that's going to be proposed by this administration. That was a surprise because what Biden has done is put someone in place who is a political operative, not a real economic administrator or manager. And so that bodes badly for the type of policy that's going to come out of the Biden administration. And so what I expect is for the Biden administration to look back at the $2.2 trillion that was in the CARES Act and whatever else needs to be spent, and say, we're out of money. We need to cut spending, and cutting spending will start with Social Security, and that's austerity, and that's the Republican playbook. I think there's also another thing that Tanden's nomination raises in terms of an alarm, is that I don't see how she gets nominated. How she gets approved in the nomination, except that the Biden administration is going to pretty much give away the store to the Republicans during that nomination process and say that whatever you want, Ms. Tanden will execute. And so we'll see that the Biden administration executing the Republican plan, which is, in fact, what the Obama administration did when they put in place the plan that was developed by the Bush administration during the financial crisis.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some weird bedfellows here when it comes to the voting of the cabinet nominees by Joe Biden. And I think he'll end up actually governing a lot like Bill Clinton did, where you see these huge sweeping pieces of legislation introduced by the executive, but finding a majority of Republicans supporting and then getting enough Democrats to support it. And that's what he'll say if the Senate is held on by Republicans, that there was no other way to, like you said, give the Republicans free reign to get things through. Steve Grumbine, let me ask you a bit of a loaded question here. What are your thoughts on Neera Tanden being nominated at OMB?
Well, I think I've left a snail trail behind me a mile long, unlike her 1,000 deleted tweets here recently. Neera Tanden, Linwood said it perfectly. She is an albatross to humanity, in my opinion. When the whole Libya thing happened, she said, hey, they got oil, we got a deficit. That was her perspective of Libya. So if you needed to know who Neera Tanden is in one word, that's it. She is probably the worst human being. And I mean, like, to be an Austerian, you really have to be a bad person, right? Austerity equals murder. Austerity directly impacts the material conditions of the people. Okay, and so this whole pay-go thing is a Thatcher-Reagan thinking of literally eliminating the concept of public money. It is about trying to pretend like the taxpayer dollar rules when we know, in fact, that the taxpayer dollar is merely an obligation that drives the currency. Those dollars are shredded, deleted, whatever you want to call it, put into oblivion when they're received as a tax. They are not in any way, shape, or form respect. So this concept of pay-go is about maintaining status quo. And here's the thing that I don't think enough people think about. You know, years ago, with the predictions for the last financial crisis, the thing that really tipped the people that really got it right, which were the MMTers, was the sectoral balances approach, the demand leakages, noticing that the money was leaving. And we have a huge trade, it's not an imbalance, we have a trade deficit. We are a net importer. So that money is leaving the economy. And then we also have a lot of wealthy people who have gotten a lot of tax breaks who have stashed that money away out of the productive economy. So you've got tremendous amounts of demand leakages that are like soaking it up. So the idea of pay-go is absolutely even more austere than you would ever believe, because what they end up doing, instead of taxing the rich, they put those taxes on the people least capable of paying them. I mean, it's a travesty.
Yeah.
And Neera Tanden will absolutely put a stranglehold on any kind of progressive legislation. You know, it might be the biggest slap in the face. And if you want to go a step further, Bernie Sanders, who was Neera Tanden's, you know, punching bag for the last 5 years, is now going to be squaring off with Bernie, who runs that side of the shop in the Senate. So it couldn't be. It is like the biggest slap in the face to progressives possible. But in a more broad term, it's a biggest slap in the face to the poor, to the environment, to everything that we think is important. So it's horrible.
I think I think what the other thing that's frustrating me, Dr. Tauheed, is the lack of creativity or innovation that this team will bring. If there was ever a time to shake things up or try a few new economic techniques to try to allow for the economy to thrive or to reorient itself that can actually challenge the climate change that's coming, now would be that time. Now would be the time to try something new. And here we are just repeating all of the old.
Well, think about the fact that with climate change being imminent and life-threatening, we can't corral the fossil fuel industry, because the fossil fuel industries get those executives give campaign donations to both the Republicans and the Democrats, and so the politicians serve their donors, and as long as they're serving their donors don't want things to change because they're doing quite well. And so we with regard to, for example, something like Social Security, I think people will remember that the second Bush administration attempted to privatize Social Security. Republicans have been against Social Security since its inception and have been trying to destroy it. They haven't been successful at that, so their play was to try to privatize it. It didn't. George Bush the second wasn't able to get that done. That process was passed on to the Obama administration, who attempted to started calling Social Security an entitlement, which it is not, and then attempted to get into a grand bargain to begin to decrease Social Security payments. That also didn't happen during the Obama administration, but he tried, and so Social Security will be on the chopping block. But it probably won't be let's eliminate Social Security. I expect a privatization movement to come back for Social Security. And what privatization does is create a private pension that's going to be managed by finance, and finance will do quite well with their fees as they're managing those Social Security benefits, those private pensions. But the public will see their pension payments decrease because the fees are going to take away that much of that pension. And so we see the same play because the same persons are paying the politicians to run their agendas.
Yeah. Dr. Linwood Tauheed, we just have about a minute left with you here. I'm curious if you had any thoughts on BlackRock and what people should know about the world's largest asset management company now having several of its executives in the White House.
Well, BlackRock is one of those players, as many of the finance houses are, that donates to Republicans and Democrats, and so it doesn't matter to a BlackRock which if Donald Trump had won, BlackRock would have been fine. Joe Biden went BlackRock is fine because they donate to both parties, and each of those parties will fulfill their agendas. And so this is the way that politics is played, because there's money in politics that is private money. Citizens United made it very clear that corporations can basically bribe and buy politicians, and that's what they're doing. And so BlackRock is, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
It's like every other large financial institution. They happen to be the largest, but they're doing the same game.
Yeah, that was Dr. Linwood Tauheed, president of the National Economic Association. Dr. Tauheed, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Steve Grumbine, you're going to hang out with us for one more segment, our Working for the Weekend segment. Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of Real Progressives. You'll be with us after the break here. Political Misfits, Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture. Time for our weekly Working for the Weekend segment, where we take a look at the individuals, groups, and even ideas that did a little too much work this weekend and need to take a long, hard weekend off. We aren't canceling anyone. We aren't saying go away forever. Feel free if you want to, but all we're saying is please just leave us alone for just a few days. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Michelle Biddy.
Sometimes we're saying go away forever, Bob. I don't want you to misrepresent me here. I am often saying go away forever.
Okay. I always heavily imply it. Michelle, a little bit more just direct, I guess, and honest with her feelings. I have to hide behind my emotions as that white man with bone spurs here. We're also joined by Steve Grumbine. He's the founder and CEO of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and the host of the podcast Macro in Chief. Steve, welcome to your first ever Working for the Weekend segment. Pretty straightforward. If you have anyone that's just drove you nuts this week, you need to be left alone. You can nominate them as we go. But I'll give you a second to maybe think about who you want to nominate, and I'll throw out my first two nominees from the world of sports, with men being really upset and shocked that women wanted anything to do with them. The first nominee for the week is NBC's Chris Collinsworth, who made sexist comments during Wednesday's Ravens at Steelers game regarding how knowledgeable women are about football. Let's have a listen to Collinsworth talk about the ladies he's met in Pittsburgh leading up to the game.
He's a fan, in particular the ladies that I met. They had really specific questions about the game. I was like, wow, you're just blown away by how strong the fans are here in this town.
Wow.
Michelle, thoughts on lady brains being able to handle the complexities of a Neanderthal sport like the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, pretty surprising, Bob, that our tiny brains can get specific. I don't know. It's just like, come on, man. It's 2020. Being shocked that women are into sports and into it in the dorky way that guys can get into it about stats and stuff like that, you really shouldn't be surprised like that. I was doing sideline drills with my dad in like 4th grade, right? It's not, football rules are not that complicated. Chris Collinsworth, sure. I mean, it's nice that we were able to please you and that you had a good time in Pittsburgh, but maybe reconsider what surprises you these days. There's other things to be surprised about.
That's true. Steve, his apology, Collinsworth apology in part read, I know the way I phrased it insulted many. I'm so sorry. What I intended as a compliment to the fans of Pittsburgh became an insult. I'm sick about insulting any fan, especially female fans and journalists. I know firsthand how much harder they have to work than any of us in this industry. I was wrong and deeply apologize. Steve, curious if you have any thoughts there on Collinsworth and his apology.
Just more Neanderthal thinking. I mean, it's like open mouth insert, but he's been famous for that for years.
Yeah, he got in some trouble a few weeks ago, him and his colleague there, Al Michaels, bemoaning the fact that they had to wear masks as they broadcasted. It looked a little silly. It's the two of them sitting in a booth. The mask obviously not going to stop all forms of transmission there in COVID. At that point, if you're in a room in a small box in a room with somebody for 3 hours, you're going to have enough swapping that swapping of saliva there as you speak and emote into the air that's not going to be stopped by a surgical mask like they had on. So it looked pretty comical, but at the point of the coronavirus, tens of thousands of people dying rapidly here, just put a mask on. Like, that's not that much to ask. You have a pretty sweet job emceeing a football game there. So speaking of football and women in sports, my next nomination goes out to the internet trolls. What a disgusting place of the internet. But Sarah Fuller, Michelle, as you may have known here, and I'm calling you out as sexist there, I'm pointing to you, Michelle, as a woman. Sarah Fuller just became the first woman to kick in a Power 5 football game when she kicked off the second half for Vanderbilt on November 28th at Missouri. And she is the only Vanderbilt kicker on the depth chart for their season finale against the 6-2 Georgia team there. So it looks like Fuller will be working extra hard. Breaking news as we went to air during the show today, that game has now been postponed because of coronavirus. So we won't see if Sarah Fuller gets an opportunity to kick a field goal or continue to be the first woman in several games to kick for the team. So that's good news. Nothing wrong there. The problem, though, and the people I need to take off are those who responded on the internet to her playing with sexist comments such as, I can't quit laughing at this. I hope she made the team some cookies, too. I hope she gets creamed, and any nude leaks. Meanwhile, Michelle, folks not taking this news well. It is really amazing to watch people so publicly embarrass themselves and project their own insecurities onto this young football player.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was going to joke that Chris Collinsworth's apology was a little bit overwrought for the crime. It wasn't that bad. You don't need to apologize like you ran over my dog or something. But these folks have a lot of explaining to do. Yeah, it's revolting, and I think that's just sort of the reality of being a woman in the public eye ever. And also the nature of the internet, because you do have this sort of phenomenon of people coming out and saying really disgusting things that they actually wouldn't say in person, and also kind of don't mean in some cases. You just end up in this weird snowball of trying to elicit a reaction. And it's like that's sort of the opposite of the dopamine hit you get from social media likes is creating these weird pile-ons. So yeah, I mean it's disappointing, it's gross, it's sad. I hope whenever that game is eventually played, I hope she does a great job. But we all know that's also not going to silence them. I don't know what will silence them. I guess you just have to ignore it.
It's just dudes with beer bellies upset because they never played college football now attacking this young woman. So pretty disgusting to see. I got one more here before I'll see if.
I think the internet troll is a weirder and broader phenomenon than that. That's what I'm going to say. I've met a few, and they don't necessarily fit that stereotype. Doesn't excuse it. I think it's a weirder impulse.
Well, explain, Michelle. Now I'm intrigued.
That's all. I've just met, I've worked with people who I later discovered were internet trolls, and they were, people whose company I really enjoyed, who I really enjoyed talking with, who I felt very much respected by. And I think I really think it is just like the people who get obsessed with their social media profiles. It's like an internet thing. I think that this is not to say we shouldn't look at these comments and see aspects and confront aspects of our culture. But I also think it is probably too much to look at comments and predict too much of what they mean about an individual is all. I don't think it is always sad sacks at home doing it.
Maybe not a sad sack, but I think it's people projecting their own insecurities. I'm not getting the attention that I want. I want to be famous like this person. I want to be the star of a team. I want to be
Maybe.
the star athlete, or I want something. I think there's something that's deeply sad about people that spend their time trolling people on the internet. I don't know, Steve, what are your thoughts on internet trolls and what motivates them?
Oh my God, do I agree with you? I mean, you, not Michelle. Sorry, Michelle. I'm going to take Bob all the way here. As somebody, when I brought out that whole taxes don't fund spending thing about 5 years ago, I had every troll under the sun literally chasing me around. And it was like a nonstop thing. And people tried to climb my leg as if I'm somebody, and I'm nobody, right? But they tried to climb my leg like it was life. And you could tell that it was an insecurity thing, that they were trying to make a name for themselves by attacking my name. And that was the whole thing. And then you meet them face to face, and they're a short, stubby person with rosy red cheeks, and they got a ice cream in their hand or something. I mean, they're just not what you think, but they are exerting some sort of inner rage or an inner insecurity out there that's their outlet. And I really believe it. Even the people that don't look like trolls in real life, when they do it, there's something inside them, I believe, honestly, that tells them that it's fun to make people upset. It's fun this is like a little bit of the kid shooting the spitball in the classroom, and the teacher turns and gets mad at the other kid for yelling about it. So I think they're a bully. I do. I think that they've got an insecurity issue, as all bullies do.
Yeah. Michelle, internet trolls, take the weekend off. You're also now nominated. Michelle or Steve, feel free to jump in. I got a couple more people I'm going to nominate, but who do you have? Anybody in mind, Steve, that's worked a little too hard this week, drove you a little nuts, and you want to take the weekend off?
You know, I think Elizabeth Warren needs to take the weekend off because of her support of Neera Tanden. She supported Neera Tanden. And seriously, think about how many people run around saying Elizabeth Warren is a progressive. And you heard Linwood speak about it. This is every chance Elizabeth Warren has had, from Standing Rock to Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders and now Neera Tanden. She has taken the wrong stance every time. And so, Elizabeth Warren, please take the rest of your career off.
The good news here, Steve, is that Elizabeth Warren apparently has sold her soul for absolutely nothing. And so her career, there's no White House for her. There's no cabinet pick. She doesn't even need us to tell her to take the weekend off because she's not getting hired for anything. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And
I'm just trying to
sit
there.
Too, by the way.
Yeah. And the other person in that orbit, speaking of non-progressives who get casted as progressives or liberal champions, Rahm Emanuel. He's also on my list of folks that need to take the weekend off. I'm going to jump on the wagon of folks this year demanding that Joe Biden does not appoint Emanuel to his cabinet. Many people are speculating that Emanuel, the former mayor and chief of staff to Barack Obama, is being considered to head the Department of Transportation. Emanuel's a scumbag. That's how I would describe him, and one of the most patronizing politicians I've ever heard. One of the cool guys, you know, Michelle, that drops the F-bomb in professional meetings. Ooh, a rebel.
Wow.
Joining a chorus of progressives and calling Biden not to pick Rahm Emanuel for a seat. It's incoming freshman Congress member Jamal Bowman, who wrote this week in the appeal regarding Emanuel's role in covering up the 2014 Chicago police killing of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. Bowman writes, quote, while Laquan's family were privately grieving their loss, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel was figuring out how to keep the video footage of Laquan's shooting from seeing the light of day. He goes on to say, so when I got word that the president-elect Biden was considering Emanuel for a cabinet position, I was hurt. It wasn't because Rahm and I have different views on policy, although we do, but because Rahm saw the murder of Laquan McDonald as a political obstacle, a threat to his re-election bid. Instead of seeking justice for Laquan and the people of Chicago, he took the coward's way out by trying to bury the story. To me, that speaks volumes about his character. I mean, Steve, this speaks volumes to Rahm Emanuel's character, but it also speaks volumes about Barack Obama, Joe Biden, the Democratic establishment, news media outlets like ABC, who employ and bring in Rahm Emanuel on all special political nights for commentary. I mean, it's just absolute trash, and it's really embodied in Rahm Emanuel. I mean, I guess it's just his connections to donors that keeps him in the power orbit of the Democratic Party. But yeah, he needs to take the weekend off.
Oh my God! Not only does he need to take the weekend off, let's bring his former boss in here as well. Obama literally told
it's too much.
Oh my God! The guy literally said, "Your snappy slogans like defund the police lose people." Who the hell says that? So the whole
on
gang,
Snapchat to middle-aged white guy was the platform he used.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Get out of here.
I like the response when people were like, defunding the police is not a slogan, it's actually a policy position. And I was like, oh, that's actually also a really good point. And then it's just like, oh my gosh, this guy just cannot have enough. It's also framed, I think that was annoying about Obama, it's framed as if he cares and as if he's trying to like root on the folks on the left and like wants them to do better. And he's giving that up. No, he's trying to stop these people from taking any power and making any inroads in the Democratic Party. Michelle, I believe you have a nominee that you wanted to get in there as well.
Yeah, I do. And I also want to say we had a lot of fun talking about Obama's Snapchat conversation earlier in the week. Just everything about it was just insulting, hypocritical, a lot of double speak there. Yeah, this insulting idea that people are in the streets for a slogan and not a policy was really garbage. We're seeing very clearly who Obama is. I feel like people who are still in denial over the role the former president is playing right now, don't have any excuse anymore, right? That bloom is off that rose. But my nomination is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, another noted scumbag. His administration, according to a story in the South Florida Sun-Sentinel this week, ordered local health officials not to release public statements about the COVID-19 pandemic for more than a month leading up to Election Day. It appears to be another effort by the governor's office to downplay the massive toll the virus has taken on public health in the state. That's coming from a write-up in Forbes. County-level spokespeople for the state's Department of Health were ordered in September to stop releasing public statements on COVID until after the election, according to this report by the Sun-Sentinel, and we're told instead to talk about things like flu shots and hearing loss as part of what is called top-down control of messaging from the governor's office. So it was people from the Department of Health talking to the Sun-Sentinel for this story, and as Sputnik producer Wyatt Reed pointed out, if this was coming out of China, we would hear this nonstop for the next 3 months about how isn't it terrible that they're trying to control the narrative and hide information from the public. And Florida, throughout this pandemic, has really been an example of political interference in public data about the pandemic. We saw this with sacking the woman who was organizing their data tracker, hiding a bunch of information, and now DeSantis, according to this report, really blatantly trying to put his finger on the scale there for the president in Florida, and maybe it worked. So job well done, Ron DeSantis. You can take a weekend off, or go to hell, Ron DeSantis. Take a weekend off. It works either way, Bob.
Yeah, do you have to work in hell? Do we actually want him to work in hell to receive the punishment? I don't want him just like chilling in hell, not actually working, if that's part of it. But either way, Michelle, I think your point is made. I want to lead into my last nominee by just mentioning here before I tell the next story that just happened yesterday. But today is the anniversary of the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, who were assassinated by Chicago Police Department and the FBI on this day in 1969. Chairman Fred was only 21 years old. That being said, my next nominee is the Kentucky Police Department and U.S. Attorney Russell Coleman. They need to take the weekend off after they've arrested the leader of a pro-gun group that stages armed protests against police violence. John F. Johnson, who calls himself Grandmaster J, is facing a federal charge of assaulting task force officers after being charged with pointing a rifle at federal officers while in Kentucky for a demonstration. According to the federal complaint, Johnson pointed an AR-style rifle with a flashlight on September 4th, which blinded several officers on the roof, including Secret Service and FBI officers. This, according to Coleman's office. Officers were concerned Johnson could accidentally fire a round. Mm-hmm. Johnson's group, known as the NFAC, has an all-black membership and often demonstrates against white supremacy and police violence. U.S. Attorney Russell Coleman said the FBI is committed to investigating violent behavior and those who are exploiting legitimate peaceful protests and engaging in violation of federal law. Johnson now faces a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison if convicted of the charge. I mean, Steve, I love the line that they were concerned that Johnson would accidentally fire a round. It really does seem like in America, we're more concerned about black people potentially shooting someone than we are about white people actually shooting people.
Imagine if the Second Amendment was really for everyone, right? Imagine if they really meant that. I think it would be. Can you imagine just watching, like, the open carry folks in Texas and down there? Imagine it being open carry black people. They would lose their effing minds. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle it because it really is one of the most racist, institutions, if you will, of our society. I mean, it's always been about keeping property, personal property. And what were black people back during slavery? They were considered personal property. This is just an extension. It's ridiculous, horrible. Oh, my God.
I also love the description of the officers on the roof being blinded by the flashlight. Does that mean they had to blink a couple of times? It's another in a long line of examples we've seen over the past several months of police officers, amplifying the risk they're under to really unbelievable degrees. Yeah. Remember the gravel? They would go around, find an empty flower pot with some gravel in it, and then line it up for a photograph like a potential Antifa missile. We know what's gravel in a flower pot, guys, and we know you weren't blinded by this flashlight.
Yeah, and it's crazy too. I'm just now thinking about being blinded. I mean, once when I was covering one of the protests here in Washington, D.C., having police, as a journalist, I'm a journalist now, and I was distancing myself from the protest to make it clear that I was not in the mood to be embedded in the protest that evening, having police throw flash grenades right at my feet. You look at a thing that's bouncing at you saying, hey, wonder what that thing is, and then it explodes and then basically blinds you for a good 10 to 15 minutes. You see nothing but dots because they were trying to basically rush the back of the protest into the front of the protest and create chaos and panic. Where's my apology? And the same thing I think happened either the same night or a few nights before that when a rogue DC National Guard helicopter was dropping down on protesters and wrongfully doing so. They've come out and admitted so, basically kicking debris up and blinding us protesters and journalists there that were out in the street. So these double standards of what could accidentally happen when a protester looks at a cop the wrong way, when cops are actually using aggressive, often unsanctioned violence against protesters. No problems there whatsoever. So all you folks that we just nominated, please take the weekend off, or as Michelle says, go away forever. Steve Grumbine, I'm sure, as always, you're going to have a hard-working weekend, always doing the people's work. We greatly appreciate your time today and all of the work you do for Real Progressives, Real Progress in Action, and Macro and Cheese. Where can people go to find more of you and your work online?
Yeah, please check us out at www.realprogressives.org. Look in our media section. You'll find our podcast, Macro and Cheese. Obviously, we're on Facebook and we're on Twitter. And you can find me personally at SD Grumbine on Twitter. I'm Austerity is Murder. So thank you all so much.
But not if you're a troll.
Not if you're a troll.